If you're a Jets fan concerned with the team's direction, owner Woody Johnson had a message for you yesterday. Thinking is overrated. That and the latest on the Davante Adams trade today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Wednesday, October 16th, 2024, and I'm your host, John B. from GanggreenNation.com. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Well, on today's show, we have our weekly mailbag. Each Wednesday, we try and do a mailbag with listener questions. Of course, it's been a very eventful week for the New York Jets. It's been a very eventful 2 weeks, so we have plenty of questions about everything going on with this team. Let's begin. Our first question is from Jimmy. Jimmy asks, am I wrong for feeling like the Davante Adams trade is not going to have the impact a lot of people believe it's going to have? This team still plays undisciplined football. It gets flagged for dumb mistakes. It cannot consistently protect the quarterback. It misses chip shot field goals. And even with a new offensive coordinator, they still make mind-numbingly dumb play calls that stall drives and leaves points on the field. I don't understand why there's such a strong sense of optimism following this trade with all these other issues that need to be addressed. And I hate to say it, but I mean, I think Jimmy makes a good point. I said this yesterday when we broke down the Davante Adams trade. Davante Adams is not some magical fix for this team. This is the type of deal you make if you've got a team that's like ready to win a Super Bowl and you just need a receiver. I mean, I think you can make the case that Buffalo is that team. Buffalo traded for Amari Cooper yesterday. It kind of flew under the radar because the big news was the Jets trading for Davante Adams. But you look at Buffalo. Buffalo is a team that clearly needs a receiver. And Buffalo is a team that, can go a long way if they with that one upgrade. The Jets have so many other issues on this team. The defense is just not good. And this is something that really worried me through the early part of the season because the defense was getting results. They had that game in Tennessee where they stood tall in the second half. They had that game where they shut New England down. They had that game where, Denver could not do a whole lot against them. And even the second half against Minnesota, the defense did play very well. But I really worried that was due to the level of competition the Jets were playing because there were some signs of cracks even within some of those games. I mean, the Tennessee game, the Titans came out and really moved the ball well on the Jets in the early stage of the first quarter and a half of that game. The Denver game, I mean, look, the Broncos put together the drives they needed. Jets needed the defense to stand up and win that game. Defense was not able to do it. Minnesota game, first half, the Vikings did whatever they wanted on offense. And the Jets had issues in the trenches on the defensive side of the ball. So and that's just one of the issues. I mean, as Jimmy mentioned, I mean, the Jets can't protect the quarterback right now. I think you'd have to say that the Tyron Smith move not working out that well. I hate to say it. I don't think the Morgan Moses move is working out that well. And yeah, I mean, coaching issues as well. Keith Carter is still the offensive line coach. The thing is, like, they fired Robert Saleh, but this is still a Robert Saleh coached team. This is like the coaching staff Robert Saleh hired. So I don't know how you can expect monumentally different results from this coaching staff because this is essentially the same staff that was in place. Yeah, they have new leadership, new direction under Jeff Ulbrich, a new guy at the top, but the same coaches who were here, who were running a lot, overseeing a lot of the day-to-day, a lot of the stuff Saleh delegated, they're still here. Now, like on some level, maybe things are better. I really liked the way Ulbrich was aggressive with his timeout usage before the end of the first half. And I thought that was the reason the Jets had an opportunity to throw that Hail Mary, because without Ulbrich using his timeouts, the time runs out before the Jets have the opportunity to run that play. So you're talking game management that can improve under Ulbrich, but there's not really anything that's going to, it's not a monumental change. And I think part of the problem with the Jets, and you see this a lot under this ownership, is they're never honestly assessing where they're at as a team. They always think they're looking for the shortcut. Looking to cut corners. They're looking for the gimmick. They're looking for the quick fix. They're looking for the one magical move that's going to save everything. And this was it almost felt like this was a turn the page kind of move. The last 2 weeks, the Jets have made moves to kind of get the attention off the fact they lost a game. They lose to Minnesota, terrible game. Robert Saleh gets fired. Suddenly, no one's talking about how they lose to Minnesota. This week, they have a horrible loss to Buffalo. They trade for Davante Adams. Now that's off the back. That's off everyone's radar. I mean, if they lose this week, are they going to give Hassan Reddick a new contract? Reddick was apparently allowed to seek a trade yesterday, so we'll see where things go there. But there are just so many issues with this team. I don't think you could look at this team honestly through the first 6 weeks and say they are one receiver away from going to the Super Bowl. What does Davante Adams add? I think there are two things he adds. Number one, he's a quick separator. He's a guy who's famous for getting off the line of scrimmage well, beating press coverage, using his footwork. And one of the most, I mean, I don't know how much people care about this stuff, but like he's one of the, what he has like some of the most creative release techniques off the line of scrimmage in the league. That's one of the reasons he's so tough to jam, because he uses his feet so well. And a lot of receivers like kind of like when they see a corner across from them playing press coverage, trying to jam them, receivers like have one technique in mind before the snap. Davante Adams kind of decides after the snap what I'm going to do. He reads it really quickly and he improvises. He improvises his release, and that's one of the reasons he's such a great quick separator. And for where the Jets offense is right now, for where Aaron Rodgers is right now, this is a get the ball out quickly kind of offense. So you need quick separation. Garrett Wilson was the only quick separator the Jets had in their receiving group. So from that standpoint, it helps. I'm not saying trading for Davante Adams doesn't help. The second thing that I think where Davante Adams will really help is his pre-existing chemistry with Rodgers. And you can see it on the field. It's not just that we've talked about it. You can see it on the field that Rodgers improvises with his throws more than practically any quarterback in the league. In the playbook, most of the plays there's in the playbook, your receiver's running a post. He runs to this point on the field. This is the time when the quarterback throws it. Rodgers reads the field better than any other quarterback. So if he sees something in the defense that he can exploit, he's going to throw the playbook out. If the play is taking the receiver right and he sees there's an opening left, he's going to throw the ball to the left and count on the receiver to adjust. And it's very well known that Rodgers is a difficult quarterback to adjust playing with, because there aren't many quarterbacks who play that way. And the stories of Rodgers, freezing, the expression I hear a lot is freezing out young receivers, is legendary, because young receivers don't really know this stuff. Young receivers are still trying to learn how to play in the NFL. They're still trying to learn the full route tree that they're running. And so Rodgers is a tough guy to play with. And you've seen it with Mike Williams that, the two of them have struggled to get on the same page. Davante Adams, I know he hasn't caught passes from Rodgers since 2021, so maybe there'll be a little rust to shake off, but it's going to come back for him quickly. And he'll understand where he needs to get. He'll understand where Rodgers is looking for him to get on any given play. I think those are the two areas where this trade will really help the Jets. But it doesn't fix all the other problems with this football team. This is a football team that has a lot of problems. And if we were talking about the areas where the Jets have issues, I don't think receiver would be at the top of the list, especially because it's felt in the last couple of weeks like Garrett Wilson and Rodgers have started to click. It took about maybe a month and change for that to happen. You saw some of the growing pains early in the season. You saw some of the frustration both guys had. But the last week and a half or so, it felt like Garrett started to figure things out. And Rodgers has started to figure out where Garrett's going to go. Garrett's figured out where Rodgers wants him to get. And things have worked a lot better with that connection. In fact, one of my concerns, I mentioned this yesterday on the special show that I did, is I hope this doesn't lead to Garrett losing an appreciable target share. That's one of, it's not the biggest concern, but it's an under the radar concern that I have, because just as things started to click, you bring in this other guy who Rodgers has all this chemistry with, who Rodgers has this connection with, who Rodgers has this friendship with. And where's that going to leave Garrett? Now, Mike Williams is the guy who should be really worried, because he might even be on his way out of town. I think Mike Williams has completely lost his role in this offense. The Jets may end up trading him before all is said and done. But I think that this was a deal. It was a kind of a classic Jets deal where they're just looking to add the big name. They aren't really looking to address their fundamental problems, and it'll help, but I don't think it'll help enough. And I agree with the question. I think that Jimmy hit on something, that this is not a move that saves the season. I don't think so, at least. Now, head here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll turn our attention to owner Woody Johnson. He gave a very memorable quote. I told you at the top of the podcast. What can Woody be stopped? Can the Jets get better ownership? Can Woody improve? Let's answer these questions continuing here on this Wednesday mailbag edition of Locked On Jets. This episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by LinkedIn. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. If you're an NFL team looking for a wide receiver, Mike Williams might be available on LinkedIn Jobs soon, because his status with the Jets seems pretty shaky right now. Well, you should know that LinkedIn is not just a jobs board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals that you cannot find anywhere else, even those who are not actively searching for a new job, but might be open to a perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. And on LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and may not have the time or resources to hire. LinkedIn is constantly finding new ways to make the process easier. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even easier and quicker. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. That's probably the reason. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is also brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You pick more or less than at least two players for a shot up to win 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long on Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the best way to get action in sports on over 30 states, including California, Florida, Georgia, and Texas. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. And Prize Picks is the best way to win real money this football season. Which players are going off, which ones aren't? Make your picks in less than 60 seconds and turn your sports opinions into real money all season long on Prize Picks. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL. It's one word with no space, LOCKEDONNFL, to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. A big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets. We have new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Let's continue now with our weekly mailbag. Our next question, it's from Taylor, who asks, John, do you think we are now at a Dan Snyder level of owner toxicity, and that Jets fans should now be protesting and boycotting the team to try and pressure Johnson into selling the team? I, for one, am incredibly frustrated watching him selling off draft assets in what is clearly a lost season in a desperate attempt to boast that he ended our playoff drought. I don't think we're at the Dan Snyder level, because you have to remember with Dan Snyder, there was all that stuff happening behind the scenes, the stuff that eventually required him to sell the team. So I don't think I don't think we're at that level. But we're just talking results. I mean, it's as bad as anything in sports right now. At the end of the day, the Jets have missed the playoffs 13 straight years. That's the longest playoff drought in any of the four major North American sports leagues. And during that 13-year stretch, we've changed coaches, we've changed general managers, we've changed players, and we've done all these things many times over. There's only been one constant. It's been the Johnson brothers running this team. And if you want to say, well, Woody Johnson was away for 4 years, well, look at the guy he put in charge. He put his brother in charge of the team. The team was arguably run worse during those 4 years than they were under Woody. It's just so frustrating. I don't know if you caught his press conference yesterday. I kind of teased the show with it. He said a 3-word statement that I think is like the perfect motto for the Jets under Woody Johnson. If you wanted to explain somebody how the Jets have run under Woody Johnson in 3 words, you couldn't have picked it better. Woody said, thinking is overrated. And if you don't think that he actually said that, you can go. This video is online. If you think I'm just trying to bash Woody, I'm making this up, it's there. It's online. But I think one of the things that's frustrating is that he's gotten worse as he's the longer he's owned the team, because that first decade, the Jets were actually reasonably successful. They never made the Super Bowl, but they made the playoffs a bunch. They made the playoffs in 2001, in 2002, in 2004. In 02 and 04, they actually won a playoff game. 06, they made the playoffs. 09 and 10, they went to the AFC Championship game. So the first decade or so, the team was actually pretty decent. I actually would have argued in that stretch that Woody was a little underrated. He was not a very popular guy at that point. And I remember arguing with people. It's not like the team's that bad. Well, now it is. And it just doesn't seem like the man's capable of learning anything. It doesn't seem like the man's capable of learning from his mistakes. I heard a guy yesterday when he spoke to the media who just doesn't know what he doesn't know. Like, if you're an owner and you realize you don't know anything about football, that's not a bad thing, because you're going to be very cautious imposing your will on the team, because you realize, I don't know what I'm doing. I may make a move that destroys everything. Woody thinks that he's smart. Woody thinks he knows what he's doing. I mean, just look at the self-assured nature he spoke with. He acted like he performed this major coup that's going to save the season. He's talking like the Jets are a Super Bowl contender right now. I find it very difficult to justify the move that the Jets made yesterday for the reasons we've laid out. This team is just not anywhere close to the Super Bowl at the moment. Like, what's the best case scenario? What's like the 95th percentile scenario? It might be like, maybe you win 7 of your last 8 games, or maybe you win 7 of your last 11 games and sneak into the playoffs at 9 and 8. That would probably be like one of the best possible scenarios for the Jets left. That's realistic. And I can't believe like you used all these resources and could possibly sell that as a success. This team did not make all these moves. This team did not trade for Aaron Rodgers. This team did not, trade all these draft picks. This team did not use up all this future cap space to go 9-8 and get the 7 seed. So, something's broken right now with this team. And I think it starts with the owner. It's an owner who's clearly taking control. I mean, where was Joe Douglas yesterday? We talked about Joe Douglas being missing when Robert Saleh was fired. Where was this guy? Like, is this guy? I mean, I don't know. Maybe there's an official press conference. I should cool off on that one, because maybe there's like an official press conference coming up to introduce Davante Adams, and Joe will be there. But you just get the feeling Woody's running everything. You get the feeling that like the GM has no say over anything, that the owner's just taking control, and he's decided to cater to the quarterback's every whim. Woody just like, he doesn't give you any sense he knows what's going on the field. I mean, did you hear he was asked a question when he spoke to the media yesterday about what Davante Adams adds to the team. His first answer was that Davante Adams improves the run game. Again, I'm not making this up. You can go look it up. You can go look at the video. In fact, I'll post the video link in the show notes so you can see this for yourself, what he said. This guy who has, it doesn't seem like he has a rudimentary understanding of football, yet he thinks he can build a Super Bowl team on his own without consulting with any football people. It's just crazy. And I don't know what we can do to force him to sell the team. I think that's part of the problem, is you can't fire the owner. You can, if you have a bad GM, you can fire him. If you have a bad coach, you can fire him. If you have bad players, you can trade them or cut them or not re-sign them. What do you do with an owner? There's no accountability for an owner. Woody Johnson, if a real business had been run the way Woody Johnson runs the Jets, they would have gone out of business decades ago. In the NFL, you can't lose money. It's a license to print money, even when you run a team the way Woody Johnson runs the Jets. And there's no way to force him out. I think maybe the best way to force him out is maybe he gets tired of losing. Maybe if this fails, he'll understand that, you know what, I'm really bad at this. Maybe I should just take my investment. I paid $635 million for this team in 2000. Now it's worth billions and billions of dollars. Maybe I should just cash out. I guess maybe that's the hope. But unfortunately, there's nothing we can really do to force that. And it's very frustrating, because it's just like, when will this team ever learn its lesson? And when will this owner ever learn his lesson? Next question is from Lou. If the Jets are, of course, in this all-in season with Rodgers, and this season turns out to be mediocre, like 7-10 or 8-9, how do they run it back next year with a 41-year-old Rodgers and expect anything different? Well, they can't. If this team goes 7-10 this year or 8-9, and Rodgers comes back next year, it's not going to get better. It's probably going to get worse, because Rodgers will be a year older, and all the key players, all the old guys they brought in, will be a year older. Jets will have to replace a bunch of guys this offseason. But I think realistically, if this season doesn't go well, Rodgers is probably going to retire, and the Jets will be starting over again. And I guess that's not the answer. Anybody, that's not a great solution either, because Jets are going to have a lot of challenges cleaning up this situation after Rodgers leaves. But unfortunately, if you're watching this team through the first 6 weeks, it is what it is. I mean, I haven't seen this team that looks like a Super Bowl contender. People say this team was a couple plays from being 5-1. Well, they're not a couple plays from being 5-1 because they've looked good. The real reason they're a couple plays from being 5-1 is that San Francisco is really the only opponent who played well against them. The Titans kind of gave them the game. The Patriots were terrible. The Patriots were just a really bad team. The Jets dominated them. The last 3 weeks, Denver, Minnesota, this game, the past game, the game on Monday against Buffalo. These teams all really tried to give the game away to the Jets. The reason the Jets were in these games is that the other teams were bad also. So this is not a team that's really looked like a Super Bowl contender. Unfortunately, that's kind of where we are, and I don't know that it's reasonable to expect that to change right now. And I think that the Jets are probably, and I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I think the Jets are probably looking at another reset after the season. I can't. I guess the one question, it seems like Lou is a little upset at the idea Rodgers may come back after a mediocre season. I think he's going to retire after the end of the season if things don't improve. Now, head here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll continue our weekly mailbag. We'll talk about a player who's been disappointing a little bit, Tyron Smith, and how his contract may not be what it seems. We'll go into more detail on that, continuing here on this Wednesday mailbag edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. When you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. And you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Currently, the Jets are 1.5-point favorites over the Pittsburgh Steelers, getting ready for Sunday Night Football. And no, the Davante Adams trade has not moved the line at all. The Jets opened as 1.5-point favorites. They remain 1.5-point favorites. So odds makers don't seem to be buying the idea that Davante Adams is going to make a big change for the Jets. But if you disagree and if you think Davante is going to lead the Jets to glory, FanDuel is the place to go to get in on the action because, again, you get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place for your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. Again, that's FanDuel, FanDuel.com. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Wednesday. We're doing our weekly mailbag show. Our next question is from Chris. Everyone keeps mentioning that the Jets got Tyron Smith for $6 million, but he's actually avoided injury and played in every game so far. So aren't these per-game incentives starting to add up as well? And that's a great point. I had not thought of that. Chris brings up a good point, is that Tyron Smith only got $6.5 million guaranteed, and the rest of the money was based on incentives. But the majority of those incentives are playing time based, because when the Jets signed him, the concern was injuries. The concern was not really performance level. It was performance level to a little bit, because I think with a 33-year-old tackle, you always have to be worried about it. But the big concern with Tyron Smith was he going to stay healthy? So the Jets gave him a lot of incentives that could reach up to $20 million. And the majority of that difference, $13.5 million or so in incentives, is based on how many snaps he plays. And Smith has obviously stayed on the field so far. Now, we're only 6 weeks into the season, but yes, it's a good point. If Tyron Smith continues to play, he's going to make a lot of money this season. I actually would argue that maybe people are overstating Tyron Smith's demise. Now, he's not been good. He's been a disappointment. I think there's no question about that. I'm not pleased with the level he's playing at, but he is not unplayable. He's not unplayably bad. So if you have a guy who just cannot play it whatsoever at the left tackle position, it can sink your offense. That alone can doom anything you do on the offensive side of the ball. If you have a guy protecting the quarterback's blind side who just can't block anybody, who gets thrown around a lot, it's going to be ugly. Tyron Smith, I think right now, is probably playing at the level of a low-level starter, but there still is some value in that, because the difference between a guy who can't play and a low-level starter, I argue it's bigger than the difference between a low-level starter and an elite guy, because your offense can at least function with a low-level starter. Now, Jets offense has had some issues, and Tyron's played into that. And I'm not saying Tyron's playing well. I'm not even arguing that he's not hurting the offense, but I do think he's not as bad as people are making him out to be. I think part of the reason, and look, I've been critical of him, and I think it's been fair. I think it is fair to criticize him. I think part of the reason the perception around him is so negative is that the expectations were so high. I think most people thought if this guy plays, he's going to be really good. And it simply has not worked out that way so far. He's been disappointing. He's been, I think, below average, but I don't think he's been like a total disaster. I don't think he's been Wayne Hunter bad. There's a difference between being Tyron Smith bad right now and Wayne Hunter bad. If you're a Jets fan who remembers the 2011 season, you know what I'm talking about. Wayne Hunter just couldn't block anybody. He was essentially like a traffic cone out there. Tyron Smith is not a traffic cone. Tyron Smith has good reps. He just gets beat too frequently. He's getting beaten at a far higher rate than he has the rest of his career. Look, I would not want Tyron Smith on my team in 2025 based on the trajectory he's on. I do worry about the contract, because like Tyron Smith right now at $6.5 million is it's still a pretty good deal. A low-level starting tackle for $6.5 million is not bad. If he plays more and gets up closer to 20 million, that is going to be a bad deal. And that's a great point by Chris. The incentives are playing time based. We're still a little early for them to have added up that high, but we could get there by the end of the season. I think that's a very fair concern. Our next question: what were Jets training camp and practices like under Saleh, and will practices under Ulbrich be any different? I ask because these teams look so sloppy, out of sync, and underprepared. Well, I don't know this. I don't know the direct answer to that particular question, but I think that question speaks to the bigger issue with the coaching change. Is that I like Jeff Ulbrich. Maybe Jeff Ulbrich can be a good head coach one day, but this is an enormous task to take on. When you're taking over a team in the middle of the season, you don't really, he hasn't been able to hire the coaches he wants. He hasn't really been able to install his philosophies. Those things are installed in training camp. You can't just come in week 5, week 6 with a new coach and then everything changes around the team. It's a tough thing to do. And look, there are other aspects that are singular to the Jets right here. When you talk about this market, we're talking about this particular team, all the expectations with Aaron Rodgers, all the other sideshows. Asking a first-time head coach to step into this spot, it's a lot. And look, Jeff Ulbrich could end up being a good coach and still not be very successful in this spot. I liked it. Dan Campbell might be my favorite coach in the NFL today. He was the interim head coach of the Dolphins in 2015 and went 5-7. You could be a good coach, but the situation of an interim label, it's just really hard to do. You're taking over on the fly. There really are not many coaches who have been terribly successful with the interim label on them. A couple of them have like late season winning streaks and convince the team to give them the job permanently, but very few teams go on to have truly successful seasons with an interim head coach. I mean, one of them was the Indianapolis Colts in 2012, and that was when Chuck Pagano, their head coach, was diagnosed with cancer during the season. So Bruce Arians, their offensive coordinator, took over and actually was kind of the thing that propelled Bruce Arians' career. Bruce Arians became a head coach after that, and a very successful head coach. He did a great job. The Raiders a couple of years ago, when they went through all this stuff with Gruden, they promoted their special teams coach and ended up making the playoffs. But there aren't many examples of it. Just think about it, you're taking over this thing on the fly. When you're a first-time head coach, it's hard. But you usually at least get a full offseason to plan things out, think about how this is what we want to do. This will be our system. And you get to hire your own staff. When you're taking over mid-season, you don't get any time to think about it. You just kind of have to implement things as we go. And I think that's part of the reason the Jets, as I said on yesterday's first show when I was recapping the game, Jets kind of looked like a Saleh coach team. Well, it's not a surprise. They've been trained by Saleh. The coaching staff is a Saleh coaching staff. It's just tough to expect markedly different results. I think any results you're going to get are going to be on the margins, and maybe the team does improve in some areas. I liked Jeff Ulbrich's game management a lot more than I like Robert Saleh's game management, but it's a lot to ask to expect Jeff Ulbrich to completely turn things around right now, and I'm not sure it's entirely fair to ask him that. Our last question, John, I remember you saying before that your dad told you once when you were a kid, you still had the chance to give up the Jets and support a different team. Maybe it was the Kyle Brady draft pick. Do you ever regret not taking his advice? And would any of the nonsense of the last 2 weeks have reached the threshold where you'd be telling your kid it's not too late to give up on the Jets? That is true. It was the Kyle Brady draft pick. We were in the car listening on the radio. It was the famous "We want Sapp." If you ever watched the video of the Jets draft blunders, all the fans were chanting "We want Sapp." They wanted Warren Sapp, the Hall of Fame the guy who went on to be the Hall of Fame defensive tackle. The Jets drafted Kyle Brady, who was a good blocking tight end, but I don't know if you want to draft a blocking tight end at the top of the first round. Do I regret it? I mean, I would love to have a team that has more wins. I would love to root for a more successful team, but I don't know. I mean, I've met so many great people through my website and through this podcast. It's tough for me to regret anything. And look, at some point, the Jets will turn this around. It may not be when Woody Johnson's the owner, but at some point, the Jets are going to turn this around. And I do think like you will appreciate it much more. It'll be like the greatest thing in the world once the Jets actually do figure things out, when the Jets actually do get people who know what they're doing in here and win games. You'll appreciate it so much because of everything you've gone through. The last part of the question, I don't have any kids right now. I would never force my kid to root for the same team as me. So yeah, I think, the Jets are the only team I have in common with my dad. My dad said you can root for whatever team you want. So I would never force my kid to root for me. I think I would have a very long talk. If I have kids in the future, I'll have a very long talk with them about the difficulty that comes with being a Jets fan, though. I think a kid should go with their eyes wide open. My dad tried with me. Maybe I'll try if I ever have kids. It's quite a ride being a Jets fan. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoyed the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoyed the show and are listening on a podcast source, please give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoyed the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Wednesday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.